Hey guys, so before we even start this video, there are 3 things I want to say, and that's Happy Halloween, Merry Christmas, and Happy New Year's. So with that said, today we are going to be doing something I've kind of been wanting to do for a while. I guess I kind of reflected at the end of this last year, and kicking off a new year, I want to start off with basically checking off something I've had on my bucket list for quite a while, and that is ranking all the class stories in Star Wars: The Old Republic. I'll get more into why I haven't done this yet pretty shortly, but this is obviously just going to be my own personal opinion and solely based off of my taste and which class stories I enjoyed the most. I'm also doing something a bit different with this video in the sense that I don't have a script or anything planned really. We're going off-road, so strap in, buckle up, and enjoy the ride, I guess. So definitely at the bottom of my list, I know for sure what I'm putting here, and that's the Smuggler story. This story is actually the sole reason why I haven't made a video like this yet, because I still haven't been able to finish this class story. It's the one class story that basically has kept me from reaching legendary status, which you get when you finish all class stories. And let me tell you, I've tried multiple times. I've even tried really putting effort into really fleshing out the character I was playing, but that just wasn't able to really get me through this class story. I don't know. I know this is most likely a kind of unpopular opinion in the SWTOR community because a lot of people like this story. But yeah, I think there are a couple reasons why this story just didn't really vibe with me. First of all is I think this class story to begin with was fighting an uphill battle because I'm not really too into the kind of smuggler scoundrel character fantasy. I've not really been a huge fan of Han Solo or those kinds of characters. To be honest, I've always been more interested in bounty hunters or Jedi and Sith and stuff like that. So yeah, this class story was fighting an uphill battle to begin with. That being said, I don't think this story is really the best, even for people who are into that kind of fantasy, because to be honest, I don't think this class story really delivers on that fantasy. Without going too into detail with the spoilers or anything, I'm gonna stay out of that, but playing the story kind of feels like the main villain in the story or the person you are chasing after is living the fantasy that you want to be playing. And to really illustrate this point, I think the opening scene is kind of the best example. Like, they don't really try to hide it really, this story. Basically the ship you have, which is kind of like a bootleg Millennium Falcon, just looks worse. But basically your ship gets stolen in the first part of the story by this other scoundrel guy who, to be honest, is kind of living the life that I guess you were hoping to experience picking a smuggler character. Yeah, and that kicking off the story that way, just, yeah, it didn't really sit right with me. There's a lot of like comedic lines and stuff, which is funny, and a lot of people like that. I just don't think it's really that interesting, the stuff I've played, and I've just kind of gotten bored of it as I went, and yeah, just not been able to complete the story, which I think says a lot. Alright, the next story, the second worst one in my opinion, I would probably have to say that would be the Jedi Consular. So this story is I guess kind of notorious for being boring, especially for a Jedi story, but somehow I was able to make it through this story, but I couldn't make it through the Smuggler one. But yeah, this story basically has you playing a more Force focused Jedi, where the Jedi Knight is kind of the more traditional heroic story you get from that class story. This one is more I guess Force focused and slightly more academic in a way, and centers a lot, without spoiling anything, it's very focused on Force healing, that concept, and kind of playing a character that is kind of really gifted in that aspect. Now, I actually think that concept is pretty unique and interesting and cool. The main issue I had with this story, and the reason why I put it in D tier here, is kind of more of a consequence or a fault of the way that the game is set up. So basically in this story there are quite a few moments where in the story you have the option to basically sacrifice something of yourself. It happens quite a few times, and kind of tapping on your own life force or your own energy to help the ones around you, which is cool. It's kind of this theme of sacrifice and being a hero in that way. The main issue is that the game doesn't really do a good job of showing the consequence of that. Like the story makes it up to be like a something that's very dangerous or taps a lot of your energy, but after you do these actions or whatever, you don't really feel like you lost anything. And that, because it happened so many times, that just kind of took me out of the story quite a bit, because it doesn't really feel like there's a price for doing this sacrifice. And yeah, it feels kind of bad that that's kind of a big con of this story, because I don't know what you could really do about it, because there is this MMO format where you can't really debuff your character in a very significant way, because that would affect your ability to play all the other content in the game, and you obviously can't kill your character. So, but I think with a story like that is very centered on this theme of sacrifice and being selfless and saving others and stuff, I think that element of having that price and that consequence for doing that, it's not just a purely positive thing because you are paying something from yourself. I think that's a really important element and kind of that seed for that conflict, like the question of, are you willing to sacrifice yourself to help others, like ultimately, or do you care more about your own survival and your own needs and stuff? So I think that's a really important aspect in a story for a story like that to work, and that's not really present in the Consular story. That's honestly my biggest gripe with this. I think it's cool to have a more force-centered Jedi, and get a kind of different experience from the traditional Jedi Knight that you've seen in a lot of other Star Wars media and stuff. So moving to B tier, I think the first one I would put here is probably the Jedi Knight, to be honest. The Jedi Knight story is, there's not really anything wrong with it per se. It's just kind of the story you'd expect. It's very heroic. You're kind of a good guy, a Jedi hero, and it's kind of centered around you saving the day, basically. Which I guess that's kind of it fulfills the fantasy of being a Jedi Knight, but that's also kind of the drawback, is that it doesn't really do anything unexpected, really. There's one moment, which I won't spoil, later on in the story, where there is kind of a shift you get to experience, which is quite fun. But yeah, it feels very traditional, and it's a decent, fun Jedi story, but yeah, it doesn't really have much room for more depth or complexity to that story. Like, for example, I think the journey that Luke Skywalker has, a lot of people like to say that's very traditional or very, very basic hero's journey, but I feel like even in that story a lot more goes on than that. I think that's not really doing it justice, because there is that whole thing with the conflict with his father being Darth Vader and stuff like that, and giving into the dark side or not. And I think that element can kind of get lost in this Jedi story unless you kind of push for it yourself, deliberately making those dark side choices. So yeah, it's a fun story. It's decent. There's not really a very many things to say about it, I feel like. If you're going into it wanting a heroic Jedi journey, I guess, I think that's basically what you're gonna get from it. Alright, next up, in B tier as well, I would put the Sith Warrior. This is a story that is very cool, basically due to the main unique thing about being a Sith Warrior is getting to play a dark side Force user, or getting to play a Sith apprentice and rising through the ranks, which is something feels like a very different and unique experience to SWTOR or Star Wars The Old Republic, because it hasn't really been explored in any other Star Wars movies or shows. So I think that's a huge draw to this story. And there's also like a lot of like a power fantasy in this story, because you get to be this powerful juggernaut that everybody fears in the story, and you can do some pretty cruel things, which I believe is why it's a popular story for, you know, those YouTube series and stuff, videos people have done playing SWTOR, have a lot of fun with this story, because there is quite a bit of like comedy going to like the extremely evil darksider, this threshold where you're so evil it's kind of comical, because because you're evil just because of it, and you could definitely do that in this story. But you could also have a slightly more grounded or not pure evil Sith Warrior, but yeah, you are still playing a Sith, and that I think is cool. I think it was one of my first class stories I played through. And yeah, it is interesting and definitely a cool journey, and that's why I put it slightly higher than the Jedi Knight. So moving into A tier, this is where we've got some pretty good stories at this point. Like I said, not all SWTOR stories are created equally, but this is where, you know, we get into some more high quality stuff, in my opinion. And the first one in A tier is actually the Trooper story. I think it's just a well-made story, because you get exactly what you are kind of hoping for. This is just a story about being a Republic soldier, which I appreciate those kinds of stories where it feels a bit more grounded, and it's not this kind of chosen one prophecy, you know, you're destined to be the hero saving the entire galaxy, but it feels more like you've received the same training that every other soldier has, and you meet other soldiers on the way, but it's just your skill and your training that makes other people around you look to you as a leader, and it feels like a more natural progression, or feels like it comes more from you rather than it's kind of put on you, if that makes sense. As like people expect you to be this, and I think that's something satisfying in those kind of stories. I think it's a similar experience I had with something like Mass Effect, which also has you playing this kind of soldier commander character and kind of rising to the task. Yeah, and it has a great start. I think chapter 1 and the whole basically prologue to the Trooper storyline is a really cool start. So yeah, I just think it's a great story. I think it's very underrated, to be honest. Yeah, and I've enjoyed it quite a lot playing it every time I play through it. Yeah, now we've reached the top 3 stories, so these are my 3 favorite stories. This is really the pinnacle of SWTOR storytelling. In my top 3, there is it's the Bounty Hunter. It's the Bounty Hunter for me. Obviously, that's my main character for this channel, and you've seen in the videos and stuff, is a Bounty Hunter. I think this has a lot more to do with me being just very fond or interested or intrigued by bounty hunters as a concept and a character fantasy, especially like Mandalorians. I think they're really cool, and having the chance to play your own bounty hunter, or in my case playing my own Mandalorian character, that's just a really cool opportunity. So yeah, that's definitely a big part of it. That being said, I also think it just offers you a pretty good bounty hunter story, as you're doing a lot of bounty hunting, taking down targets and capturing people and carbonite freezing them, I believe, as well. And you can be kind of a bounty hunter with more of a moral code or honor, or you can be a kind of brutal, ruthless bounty hunter that just always brings in the bounties cold. Yeah, and I think that's cool. I think the only slight con to this story is that it can get a little bit repetitive from what I remember, especially in the middle part, because it does feel kind of like you're just going after one bounty after another, without anything really interesting happening beyond just kind of going through your checklist of bounties you have to get through. That's a bit of a negative, and also just personally for me, it's a bit of a negative that the bounty hunter is locked under the Sith Empire, that it's an Empire class, because I personally feel like there was a chance for my character to kind of turn more into light side, or not really, at least not supporting the Empire per se or working for them. But I didn't really have the option, obviously, because bounty hunter is an Empire class, so I didn't really have the option to kind of explore that in the story. You're kind of locked into, I guess, being on that side at the end still. But yeah, that's kind of the same thing with the Jedi Consular, that it feels like it's more of a negative that comes from the format and the kind of boundaries that SWTOR has, because it is kind of an MMO with these two factions and only so much you can do in terms of the story, which I think holds it back in quite a few places. Yeah, I think it's a really cool story. You should definitely check it out if you like bounty hunters. So my second favorite class story in SWTOR is actually the Sith Inquisitor. I think the reason I like this story quite a bit is because I get kind of the same experience from the Sith Warrior, in the sense that you get to start from the very dirt and mud of being a Sith acolyte, this terrible existence where everyone looks down on you and kind of wishes for you to fail, because they have their own interests and stuff, very selfish, and you start really from essentially being a slave, and then getting to rise through the ranks of the Sith, and kind of getting to see that other side, the flip side from the Jedi and stuff. And that's really cool in of itself. But then the story also has introduces some more personal elements, and has this kind of Sith alchemy and these rituals and artifacts and stuff that you get to kind of explore and interact with, which I think added some of that kind of spice and extra cool stuff that was kind of missing from the Sith Warrior, in my experience. Yeah, so I really enjoyed kind of getting that dark side, that Sith story with a twist, basically. And there's also some twists in this story that are kind of interesting, I guess. Whenever I make a Sith character, I basically just almost always will pick the Sith Inquisitor as the class story. And that leaves us with the number one class story, which to some people it's no surprise that the one and only Imperial Agent is the best story. I think this is just taking into account that the format and the kind of limitations of SWTOR and kind of what they could do with a class story. I think the Imperial Agent is basically an example of the very best you could do it's very clear that there's a pretty big quality difference between the Imperial Agent story and all the other class stories, from like the way the cinematics, the cameras, angles and panning and stuff, and obviously also the way the story is written, and the choices you get to make are feel a lot more significant in this class, in this story, than they do in the rest, which I also think makes it very replayable. I definitely want to try this story again at some point and see what happens if I make different choices. But yeah, I think this really puts you in the space of being an Imperial spy, basically, like that James Bond secret agent kind of vibe. And that's just also a very cool, unique concept. Not something I was really have thought or thought about myself as a kind of a character concept or fantasy I'd be interested in. But this story is just so well executed that I think it keeps you invested throughout that whole journey. Yeah, lots of interesting choices and twists and turns in this story, and some fun mechanics and things you get to do. So yeah, this story is definitely, I think every SWTOR player should definitely play the Imperial Agent at some point. That's kind of a must. You should put it on your bucket list if you haven't. Yeah, so I guess that's it. I started off this year strong, checked off that bucket list of doing this ranking, and that's where I would put them. I've said multiple times that in Star Wars: The Old Republic, the class stories are definitely some of the best content in the game, and then a few of the expansions are also cool too. I think the class stories are the main reason why I come back to the game every now and then to play through them with a new character and stuff. And yeah, I don't know if I will ever be able to finish the Smuggler story. We'll see. So yeah, with that said, I hope you have a great day or night. And as always, may the Force be with you.